The Albigensian Crusade or Cathar Crusade was a 20-year military campaign initiated by Pope Innocent III to eliminate Catharism in Languedoc, in the south of France. The crusade was prosecuted primarily by the French crown and promptly took on a political flavor, resulting in not only a significant reduction in the number of practicing Cathars but also a realignment of the county of Toulouse, bringing it into the sphere of the French crown and diminishing the distinct regional culture and high level of influence of the Counts of Barcelona, the medieval Christian sect of the Cathars, against whom the crusade was directed, originated from a reform movement within the Bogomil churches of Dalmatia and Bulgaria calling for a return to the Christian message of perfection, poverty and preaching. Their theology was basically dualist. Between 1022 and 1163, they were condemned by 8 local church councils, the last of which, held at Tours, declared that all Albigenses should be imprisoned and their property confiscated, and by the Third Council of the Lateran of 1179. Innocent III's diplomatic attempts to roll back Catharism met with little success. After the murder of his legate, Pierre de Carsonneau, in 1208, Innocent III declared a crusade against the Cathars. He offered the lands of the Cathar heretics to any French nobleman willing to take up arms. After initial successes, the French barons faced a general uprising in Languedoc which led to the intervention of the French royal army. The Albigensian Crusade also had a role in the creation and institutionalization of both the Dominican order and the medieval Inquisition. Origin. By the 12th century, organized groups of dissidents, such as the Waldensians and Cathars, were beginning to appear in the towns and cities of newly urbanized areas. In western Mediterranean France, one of the most urbanized areas of Europe at the time, the Cathars grew to represent a popular mass movement, and the belief was spreading to other areas. Relatively few believers took the consolamentum to become full Cathars, but the movement attracted many followers and sympathizers. The theology of the Cathars was dualistic, a belief in two equal and comparable transcendental principles, God, the force of good, and Satan, or the demiurge, the force of evil. They held that the physical world was evil and created by this demiurge, which they called Rex Mundi. Rex Mundi encompassed all that was corporeal, chaotic and powerful. The Cathar understanding of God was entirely disincarnate. They viewed God as a being or principle of pure spirit and completely unsullied by the taint of matter. He was the God of love, order and peace. Jesus was an angel with only a phantom body, and the accounts of him in the New Testament were to be understood allegorically, as the physical world and the human body were the creation of the evil principle. Sexual abstinence was encouraged. Civil authority had no claim on a Cathar, since this was the rule of the physical world. Deriving from earlier varieties of Gnosticism, Cathar theology found its greatest success in the Languedoc. The Cathars were known as Albigensians because of their association with the city of Albi, and because the 1176 Church Council which declared the Cathar doctrine heretical was held near Albi. In Languedoc, political control was divided among many local lords and town councils. Before the Crusade there was little fighting in the area and a fairly sophisticated polity. Western Mediterranean France itself was at that time divided between the Crown of Aragon and the county of Toulouse. On becoming pope in 1198, Innocent III resolved to deal with the Cathars and sent a delegation of friars to the province of Languedoc to assess the situation. The Cathars of Languedoc were seen as not showing proper respect for the authority of the French king or the local Catholic Church, and their leaders were being protected by powerful nobles, who had clear interest in independence from the king. One of the most powerful, Count Raymond VI, Count of Toulouse, openly supported the Cathars and their independence movement. He refused to assist the delegation. He was excommunicated in May 1207 and an interdict was placed on his lands. The senior papal legate, Pierre de Carsonneau, seen as responsible for these actions, was killed and his death was attributed to supporters of the Count. This brought down more penalties on Count Raymond, but he soon agreed to reconcile with the Church and the excommunication was lifted. At the Council of Avignon, Raymond was again excommunicated for not fulfilling the conditions of ecclesiastical reconciliation. King Philip II of France decided to act against those nobles who permitted Catharism within their lands and undermined secular authority. Though the actual crusade lasted only 2 months, the internal conflict between the north and the south of France continued for some 20 years. Military campaigns. The military campaigns of the crusade may be divided into several periods. The first, from 1209 to 1215, contained a series of great successes for the Crusaders in Languedoc, with episodes of extreme violence such as the slaughter of the population of Béziers. The forces assembled mainly from the Ile-de-France and the north of France, led by Simon de Montfort, faced the nobility of Toulouse, led by Count Raymond VI of Toulouse and the Trencavel family that, as allies and vassals of the Crown of Aragon, sought help from King Peter II of Aragon. Peter II was killed in the course of the Battle of Muret in 1213. The captured lands were largely lost between 1215 and 1225 in a series of revolts and military reverses. The death of Simon de Montfort at Toulouse after the return of Count Raymond VII of Toulouse and the consolidation of Albigensian resistance, supported by the forces of the Count of Foix and the Crown of Aragon, resulted in the military intervention of Louis VIII of France from 1226 with the support of Pope Honorius III. The situation turned again following the intervention of the French king, Louis VIII, in 1226. He died in November of that year, but the struggle continued under King Louis IX, and the area was reconquered by 1229. The leading nobles made peace, culminating in the Treaty of Meaux Paris in 1229, by the terms of which it was agreed that the county of Toulouse would be integrated into the French crown. After 1233, the Inquisition was central to crushing what remained of Catharism. Resistance and occasional revolts continued, but the days of Catharism were numbered. Military action ceased in 1255. Initial success 1209 to 1215. By mid-1209, around 10,000 Crusaders had gathered in Lyon before marching south. In June, Raymond of Toulouse, recognizing the disaster at hand, finally promised to act against the Cathars, and his excommunication was lifted. The Crusaders turned towards Montpellier and the lands of Raymond Roger de Trencavel, aiming for the Cathar communities around Albi and Carcassonne. Like Raymond of Toulouse, Raymond Roger sought an accommodation with the Crusaders, but he was refused a meeting and raced back to Carcassonne to prepare his defences. Massacre at Béziers. The Crusaders captured the small village of Servien and then headed for Béziers, arriving on the 21st of July 1209. Under the command of the papal legate, Arnaud Amaury, they started to besiege the city, calling on the Catholics within to come out, and demanding that the Cathars surrender. Both groups refused. The city fell the following day when an abortive sortie was pursued back through the open gates. The entire population was slaughtered and the city burned to the ground. Contemporary sources give estimates of the number of dead ranging between 15,000 and 20,000. The latter figure appears in Arnaud Amaury's report to the Pope. The news of the disaster quickly spread and afterwards many settlements surrendered without a fight. Fall of Carcassonne. The next major target was Carcassonne. The city was well fortified, but vulnerable, and overflowing with refugees. The Crusaders arrived on the 1st of August 1209. The siege did not last long. By the 7th of August they had cut the city's water supply. Raymond Roger sought negotiations but was taken prisoner while under truce, and Carcassonne surrendered on the 15th of August. The people were not killed, but were forced to leave the town, naked according to Peter of Les Vaux de Cernay, in their shifts and breeches, according to another source. Simon de Montfort was then appointed leader of the Crusader army, and was granted control of the area encompassing Carcassonne, Albi, and Béziers. After the fall of Carcassonne, other towns surrendered without a fight. Albi, Castelnaudary, Castres, Fanjeaux, Limoux, Lombez and Montreal all fell quickly during the autumn. However, some of the towns that had surrendered later revolted. Lasters and the castle of Cabaret. The next battle centered around Lasters and the adjacent castle of Cabaret. Attacked in December 1209, Pierre-Roger de Cabaret repulsed the assault. Fighting largely halted over the winter, but fresh crusaders arrived. In March 1210, Bram was captured after a short siege. In June the well-fortified city of Minov was besieged. It withstood a heavy bombardment, but in late June the main well was destroyed and on July 22, the city surrendered. The Cathars were given the opportunity to convert to Catholicism. Most did. The 140 who refused were burned at the stake. In August the crusade proceeded to the stronghold of Termes. Despite sallies from Pierre-Roger de Cabaret, the siege was solid, and in December the town fell. It was the last action of the year. By the time operations resumed in 1211, the actions of Arnaud Amaury and Simon de Montfort had alienated several important lords, including Raymond de Toulouse, who had been excommunicated again. The Crusaders returned in force to Lasters in March and Pierre-Roger de Cabaret soon agreed to surrender. In May the castle of Amaury de Montreal was retaken, he and his senior knights were hanged, and several hundred Cathars were burned. Cassars and Montferrand both fell easily in early June and the Crusaders headed for Toulouse. The town was besieged, but for once the attackers were short of supplies and men, and Simon de Montfort withdrew before the end of the month. Emboldened, Raymond de Toulouse led a force to attack Montfort at Castelnaudary in September. Montfort broke free from the siege but Castelnaudary fell and Raymond's forces went on to liberate over 30 towns before the counter-attack ground to a halt at Lasters. In the autumn, the following year much of the province of Toulouse was captured by Catholic forces. Toulouse in 1213, forces led by King Peter II of Aragon, came to the aid of Toulouse. The force besieged Muret, but in September the Battle of Muret led to the death of King Peter, and his army fled. It was a serious blow for the resistance, and in 1214 the situation became worse. Raymond was forced to flee to England, and his lands were given by the Pope to the victorious Philip II, a stratagem which finally succeeded in interesting the king in the conflict. In November the always active Simon de Montfort entered Périgord and easily captured the castles of Dom and Montfort. He also occupied Castelnaud, and destroyed the fortifications of Baynac. In 1215, Castelnaud was recaptured by Montfort, and the Crusaders entered Toulouse. Toulouse was gifted to Montfort. In April 1216 he ceded his lands to Philip. Revolts and reverses 1216 to 1225. However, Raymond, together with his son, returned to the region in April 1216 and soon raised a substantial force from disaffected towns. Beaucaire was besieged in May and fell after 3 months. The efforts of Montfort to relieve the town were repulsed. Montfort then had to put down an uprising in Toulouse before heading west to capture Bigorre, but he was repulsed at Lourdes in December 1216. In September 1217, Raymond retook Toulouse while Montfort was occupied in the Foix region. Montfort hurried back, but his forces were insufficient to retake the town before campaigning halted. Montfort renewed the siege in the spring of 1218. While attempting to fend off a sally by the defenders, Montfort was struck and killed by a stone hurled from defensive siege equipment. Popular accounts state that the city's artillery was operated by the women and girls of Toulouse. Innocent III died in July 1216 and with Montfort now dead, the crusade was left in temporary disarray. The command passed to the more cautious Philippe II, who was more concerned with Toulouse than heresy. The Crusaders had taken Beaucaire and besieged Marmande in late 1218 under Amaury de Montfort, son of the late Simon. While Marmande fell on June 3, 1219, attempts to retake Toulouse failed, and a number of Montfort holds also fell. In 1220, Castelnaudary was retaken from Montfort. He again besieged the town in July 1220, but it withstood an 8-month assault. In 1221, the success of Raymond and his son continued. Montreal and Fanjeaux were retaken and many Catholics were forced to flee. In 1222, Raymond died and was succeeded by his son, also named Raymond. In 1223, Philip II died and was succeeded by Louis VIII. In 1224, Amaury de Montfort abandoned Carcassonne. The son of Raymond, Roger de Trencavel, returned from exile to reclaim the area. Montfort offered his claim to the lands of Languedoc to Louis VIII, who accepted. French royal intervention in November 1225. At a council at Bourges, Raymond, like his father, was excommunicated. The council gathered 1,000 churchmen to authorize a tax on their annual incomes, the Albigensian tenth, to support the crusade. Though permanent reforms intended to fund the papacy in perpetuity founded, Louis VIII headed the new crusade into the area in June 1226. Fortified towns and castles surrendered without resistance. However, Avignon, nominally under the rule of the German emperor, did resist, and it took a 3-month siege to force its surrender that September. Louis VIII died in November and was succeeded by the child King Louis IX. But Queen Regent Blanche of Castile allowed the crusade to continue under Humbert de Beaujeu. La Besside fell in 1227 and Véret in 1228. While besieging Toulouse, the Crusaders systematically laid waste to the surrounding landscape, uprooting vineyards, burning fields and farms, slaughtering livestock. Raymond did not have the manpower to intervene. Eventually Queen Blanche offered Raymond a treaty recognizing him as ruler of Toulouse in exchange for his fighting the Cathars, returning all church property, turning over his castles and destroying the defenses of Toulouse. Moreover, Raymond had to marry his daughter Jeanne to Louis's brother Alphonse, with the couple and their heirs obtaining Toulouse after Raymond's death, and the inheritance reverting to the king in the event that they did not have issue, as eventually proved to be the case. Raymond agreed and signed the Treaty of Paris at Meaux on April 12, 1229. He was then seized, whipped and briefly imprisoned. After 1229, the Inquisition was established in 1234 to uproot the remaining Cathars, operating in the south at Toulouse, Albi, Carcassonne and other towns during the whole of the 13th century, and a great part of the 14th. It succeeded in crushing Catharism as a popular movement and driving its remaining adherents underground. Punishments for Cathars who refused to recant ranged from cross-wearing and pilgrimage to imprisonment and burning. From May 1243 to March 1244, the Cathar fortress of Montségur was besieged by the troops of the Seneschal of Carcassonne and the Archbishop of Narbonne. On the 16th of March 1244, a large and symbolically important massacre took place, where over 200 Cathar prefects were burnt in an enormous pyre at the Prat des Crémits near the foot of the castle.